Hey guys. So that was something. That was actually I don't that wasn't quite as painful as the last chapter. I don't think. I don't feel like I did the same thing the same way quite so many times, which is what was so painful about the last one. But that was a long one. I mean, that was multi-part in an interesting way that we haven't really seen before. The levels are getting more complex. Mario Kart 2 64. I have played. Jesus. Okay. All right. I'll keep that in mind. I'll keep that in mind. That would be an interesting one. Was that? Can you guys who can sort of like parse this better? Was that a random dead lady on the floor next to the video clerk? Uh, because there haven't been a lot of ladies in the game. So if that was a random dead lady, then I don't know who she was. Okay, to what extent do you think the clumsiness of the controls is impacting your experience of the game? There have been a bunch of times when silly things happen, like you swing in the wrong direction, where it makes it hard to be immersed in the game. Yeah. It's tough. It's tough. The thing that really bothers me is the inconsistency. So I don't play a lot of dual stick shooters, and I certainly don't play a lot of dual stick shooters using a mouse and keyboard. I think maybe if I had more familiarity with that genre, if I was just more practiced with it, then some of these mistakes that I'm making are just rookie mistakes I wouldn't be making. But some of them do feel like inconsistencies in the system, and some of that has to do with confusion. Definitely, like so. For example, when I'm targeting somebody and I untarget them, and then I'm not sure where my mouse is, I'm not sure which direction I'm facing. I'm pretty sure that the system is consistent about what it does. My guess would be that it puts the mouse cursor right on top of me, so whatever direction I move the mouse, that's the direction I'm going to face. But invariably, that happens at a moment where my attention is divided amongst at least two other things. The enemy that I was targeting and the enemy that is now approaching me that I need to target. And so uh, because I'm so distracted in that moment, it's very hard for me to form a clear mental model of what the system is, how it works, and how I'm supposed to interact with it. Other times, it feels like I'm too close to an enemy to hit them, or I run into a door and it only kind of half swings and it doesn't knock anybody over. Or the dog frequently ends up in the same space as me, and so it doesn't hurt me. But as soon as I move away from that space, then it can lunge at me. And there's like these weird little glitchy things that don't feel intentional. They feel glitchy. They feel like there's a little bit of sloppiness in the game mechanics, which is, invariable. I mean, games are extremely complicated systems and they're hard to program, and you're always going to get some glitchiness. It's unfortunate in action games, in a game like this that is like frequently high stakes, but always like high adrenaline. Where there's a lot of quick reaction times, and a lot of confusion going on anyway, to have those kinds of glitches can be frustrating. Um, I wonder who the woman was at the video store. It looked like a woman, might have been hair. It did look like hair. But I guess the video guy had long hair, so maybe it was him. I don't know. I don't know. It could have been the same guy. But then it seems like the guy at the pizza store and the convenience store and the video store all kind of looked like the same guy. They weren't supposed to be the same guy, were they? I mean, they looked very similar. And so I don't know. It's difficult for me to sort of really tell what's going on because of the fidelity of the graphics, which in general I don't mind. Again, I like that a lot, but when they're trying to convey something subtle, I feel like that's where it falls down. Thoughts on games like Hotline, where it's essentially one-hit kills versus first-person shooters, especially Halo and that sort of thing, where it takes many, many shots to kill, in terms of how violent the game feels or how you feel playing. Gosh. I don't know. It doesn't strike me as having a really strong impact on my experience of violence. I mean, I sort of feel like if I'm firing a gun at something, then that's pretty violent. Like it's hard to get more violent than that. In the sense that violence is like, um, you know, I would actually be curious to sort of read up a little bit more on theories of violence and what violence is exactly, what it means to be violent. I think of violence as a sort of a very forceful and direct, uncompromising, um, uncommunicative uh, problem, like conflict resolution that's sort of based on the idea of advantaging one party and disadvantaging the other. And pretty much any kind of firing a gun at somebody is like the maximum level of that, of like that kind of tops out the violence scale. Now there's a graphic violence, and there's something to using this machete to like cut people in half and decapitate them, that is I guess more violent. I feel like it's more just, it's reveling more in the violence. And so for me, I feel like in both cases, those games are violent. It doesn't matter how many hits it takes to kill. There's no other thing that you're trying to do. You're not trying to like, warn somebody or scare them away. If that were a valid strategy, and so shooting your gun at someone didn't have to kill them, uh, and there was some purpose to that, then I would say that allowed for sort of more nonviolent solutions. But the thing with Halo, yeah, each individual bullet is less powerful, is less lethal, but you're the only reason that you were pointing a gun at somebody is in order to kill them. So that doesn't feel like it's dramatically less violent to me. I think there's something horrifying about the violence in Hotline Miami that has to do with how visceral it is and how graphic it is. But it's still this kind of like direct, non-communicative, force-based, one-sided problem solving that is, I mean, it is still the embodiment of violence in both cases, I think. You may not notice it, but a lot of the time there are audio cues that I think I'm missing, that seem to be part of the reason why I'm having such an issue sometimes. I am super interested in that because I think sometimes I am maybe missing audio cues, You're talking about specifically like when I kill somebody versus when I knock them out. Um, I would totally believe that. A lot of the time when I a lot of the time when I'm having confusion, it's when there are multiple people involved, and some of them die and some of them get knocked out, and it's not clear to me that some of them got knocked out. I think there's absolutely an audio cue related to characters dying, and I think if I hear that, then I just kind of assume that everybody died. If there is an audio cue associated with them being knocked out, that's not something that I'm consciously aware of, and it may be too subtle. It's not cueing me well enough. Because the only time that I sort of recognize that somebody's been knocked out when I didn't like deliberately intend for that to happen is when I get a very clear view of their body and it is completely intact. Like there's a graphic for a knocked out guy that's different from the variety of different ways that guys can be maimed and killed. But often I don't see that. That's not cued very well either. That's because it's often kind of a neutral. It's like a base pose, and it can get buried under other things. Um, I think probably the same thing happens with the audio cue. I'm just not hearing it. I do. I pause and break immersion from the game. Yeah, I do that. Um, I might do that even if I wasn't talking about the game. It's an intense game. It's like physically intense. Like there's an adrenaline to it that I feel like I need a break from every once in a while. Honestly, uh, there are definitely some things that it's easier to notice as a stream viewer than as a player. Um, and vice versa. There are some things that it's easier to notice as a player than as a viewer. And I try to point those things out when I identify them, but things that are harder to notice as a player, anytime, like I said, anytime my attention is distracted by too many things, I'm trying to focus attention on too many things at the same time, it's very, very easy for me to miss something else that's going on, especially like an ambient sound or an audio cue. Um, and also, I think anytime like I'm particularly anxious, anytime I get a little burst of adrenaline, I think it also probably makes it hard for me to be totally aware of what's going on. How do I feel about the nausea-causing visuals? Were they necessary for the gameplay, or were they just a bad decision by the game developer? Um, so it's oh man, bad decision by the game developer. That's tough. I don't want to say that I'm never gonna call something a bad decision. I probably already have. Um, it's easy to be critical um, as a consumer, and it's usually not super helpful. This is my opinion. Because as a consumer, you're only seeing half of the picture. You don't know everything that went into all of the design decisions. You don't know the production side at all. You don't know the publishing and marketing sides. You don't know market research. You don't know technical issues. There's a lot that you don't know. And so calling something out as a bad decision, implying that sort of it was deliberately made and incorrect, that's really hard for me to do. And I'll mostly only do it, I think, in minor cases. I think it's more helpful to view a game as sort of a completed piece and assume that there's intention behind it and try to understand what that intention is. And then you can judge the whole game. Is the game what does the game do well? What does it not do well? Is it a good game? But if it's a good game, then it's kind of difficult to like separate out all of the different things that make it good. You kind of have to take it as a whole package. So I would say I wouldn't call that a bad decision. I think it has some effects. And one of the effects that it has is that it's going to restrict your audience to some degree. There are some people who are just not going to play this game because they're pretty much not able to play this game. I don't know how big a proportion of the audience that is. My suspicion is that it's not huge. But again, I don't really know. My suspicion is also that it's mostly not core gamers. And I don't know a lot. Like, I haven't done a lot of research on simulator sickness, but I know there is research out there, so it'd be interesting to kind of know these things. My guess is that people who are prone to simulator sickness tend not to play a lot of games because it makes them sick. And people who play a lot of games tend to develop coping strategies for simulator sickness. So they don't suffer from it as much, even if they're prone to it. Hotline Miami, I think, is very deliberate in its attempt to induce a low level of simulator sickness. And so even in people who aren't prone to it, who aren't completely turned off of the game, entirely, they are going to feel something uncomfortable while they play. I think that means it's hard to play this game for an extended period of time without taking breaks, which is interesting because the game, to some extent, demands that you play it for a certain amount of time without taking breaks. The repetitive nature of it makes you want to sort of keep playing the same chapter until you get the chapter done. The chapters are relatively short. Like, you can beat each one in, at most, a couple hours. I mean, took me maybe an hour and a half to do that one, maybe an hour and a half to do some of them. But more likely half an hour to an hour. And if you were talking less than me, then you could probably do it faster than that. So that's probably calculated to be an amount of time that a person can reasonably sit through sort of watching this game without getting like really sick. But after you've been playing it for a while, you kind of need to take a break. One of the things that I think is an influence on this is Clockwork Orange, which is a really fascinating movie and a really, really great book. I love the book. I like the book a lot more than the movie. And the book in particular, there's this weird resonance between that and this, where the story, if you're unfamiliar with it, is about in a future that's actually sort of there's a lot of Russian influence on the United States. Like, a lot of their slang is Russian. So it's interesting that there's actually a Russian connection between that and this game as well. There's a character who's part of a gang who go around doing just incredibly brutally violent things for fun. I think they call it ultraviolence, and that's just sort of like, that's a thing that they do. This guy gets caught, and he's given an option. Instead of like going to prison forever, they're going to treat him. They're going to give him an experimental treatment. And in the book, the experimental treatment is they give him drugs that make him incredibly nauseous, and they force him to watch extremely violent film. And they're trying to train him at a like psychological level, at a unconscious level, to associate the images of violence with the nauseous feeling, so that he'll be incapable of committing further acts of violence, because as soon as he starts thinking violent thoughts, he'll get sick to his stomach, he'll feel nauseous, and he won't be able to follow through on it. This game kind of feels like the whole, therapy sequence in the book, Clockwork Orange, because I'm, spending hours on end staring at a screen of incredibly violent imagery, while kind of feeling sick. And, you know, I don't actually think that it's designed in a way that is making me associate those feelings of sickness with the violence. I certainly don't think it's designed in a way that's going to make me incapable or even sort of less likely to commit violence in the future. But it is remarkably reminiscent of that, literally the treatment that Alex goes through in the book. So that's to say, like, I think there's part of it that's an artistic homage. I think part of it is to create this sense that that there's something upsetting, there's something off-putting about the game when you're playing it, and you feel it sort of emotionally, but you also feel it physically, right? I mean, we talked about like intellectual, emotional, and physical stimulus. Well, this is a way that you can actually generate physical stimulus, and it's negative stimulus, but that's powerful. That's still powerful. And if you can get somebody to continue playing your game, I mean, if it's all negative stimulus, then nobody's going to play your game. But if you can balance it so that you're giving somebody some negative stimulus, especially if that can be sort of not constant, but presented in a way that's like associated with different parts of the game, that can be really powerful. That can create a really powerful experience and different kinds of feelings in people. Clockwork Orange is really, really super awesome. Anybody who wants to read it, okay, let me tell you my Clockwork Orange story. The first time I read Clockwork Orange, I had the flu. And about halfway through the book, I was, I was like laying in bed, kind of delirious, like running a fever, reading, because that's what I did when I was in bed sick. And it was the like trippiest thing. The book is written wonderfully. The author is a linguist, and he also wrote books on etymology. So the story of it is pretty good. I enjoyed it. It's up and down. Like, I could make arguments about the quality of the story, but the storytelling, the narrative, is fantastic, because it's all told from the perspective of this character in the sort of near future United States that has been heavily influenced by Russia. He's a young person. He's a gangster. He speaks and thinks in slang that is not modern English slang. It's a future English slang that's heavily influenced by Russian. And the book does a great job of not defining words, just using them, and using them in a, like, sort of doling them out in a way that some of them their meaning is obvious from context. And some of them, their meaning isn't immediately obvious from context, but you remember them, and then they come back again and again and again, and eventually you figure out what the meaning is. And so it's this really interesting thing where you're reading this, from this kid's perspective with all of this slang embedded in the narrative. I'm like passed out, running a fever, delirious, dreaming in Russian slang, Russian like future slang, one of the like weirdest, trippiest experiences that I had, uh, not related to drugs in any way, just sort of, you know, delirium. Um, so I don't know that that sells the book. The book is great. The book is like really great at building this world through language. That's what it's really good at. The other thing that I like about the book is it's got kind of a pat ending, but I enjoyed it. I liked the resolution of it. The book, when it came out in the United States, they cut the entire last chapter, and then the movie that Stanley Kubrick made is based on the American version of the book that has the entire last chapter cut. And so it's kind of a very different story, because the entire resolution, that was written in the original book doesn't exist in the movie, and so it ends. You know, it ends a whole chapter before the story was supposed to end. It ends dramatically differently, and I think it's arguable which is the better ending. But I thought that the book's ending was, in a lot of ways, cleaner. I liked it better. Yeah, so, you know, homework: go read that book and watch the movie. Compare and contrast. No, it's. I mean, they are interesting though. It's good stuff. Um, huh. Every checkout of Clockwork Orange comes with a free registration with the FBI. Yeah, that could be. Um, Reminds me a bit of one of the stories in Cloud Atlas, the most futuristic one. Interesting imagining language development. I agree. I really like the idea of language development and including that in speculative fiction. I was going to say there's not enough of that. I think there has historically been a lot of that, and just a lot of it has been adopted into our language. Just this last year, I read, what did I read? Um, the Heinlein book about Mars. Can't think of the title of it. The book that the word grok comes from. That's one of the less well known examples. I mean, Android is a was a neologism when that was coined in sci-fi. There are other words that I'm like Asimov. I know invented some words that we just use now. I can't think of what they are. Any thoughts on the masks? It seems like they represent a form of identity in this game. Repeating a question from earlier. Yeah. Hmm. So the question of identity is really interesting. It's been brought up like a couple of times in a very obvious way. It's been posed as a question, but there's been very little done to actually shed any light on it. Um, I guess it's been deepened in sort of a philosophical sense. The one guy, the owl, keeps probing us with questions about, do you think you're a good person? Do you enjoy hurting people? Like those are very fundamental questions about your identity, but there aren't any answers to them. I mean, except for the obvious ones that I'm not a good person and I do enjoy hurting people, because the game is sort of making me do that. Um, but I don't really get a good sense of what my identity is. I think what's more interesting, honestly, than the masks are the moments when I take the mask off. And when I'm not wearing a mask, when I'm not wearing a mask in my apartment, when I'm not wearing a mask in the pizza shop, and when I get killed and my mask sort of flies off, and I still don't have a sense of my identity. It's not. I mean, usually you think of a mask as a form of switching identities or hiding your identity or somehow altering your identity, but The masks have more of an identity than the character unmasked does. It feels like. I mean, I kind of know who these masks are because they're differentiated from one another. I know that Graham is fast. I think that's the rabbit, and the other one, the lion guy, Tony, the tiger. Tony the tiger is sort of vicious and strong. Like there's something that I associate with each of those identities. When I take the mask off, I have no idea who I am. And I think that's deliberate. I think the game is trying to sort of create that sense of ambiguity, of not knowing, of that lack of identity. Um, but it doesn't give me much to hang on to, right? Like there's not much that I can do with that. Except, yes, Stranger in a Strange Land. That's the Hotline book. Yep. So it's hard. Like the only thing I can do is sort of wait and see if more of my identity will be revealed, either through any of these different parts of the game, through the sort of meta chapters of talking to guys in a Lynchian back room, or through the apartment, or through these scenes with the now stranger in the video store, or through the actual violent gameplay itself. Did Asimov invent robot? I believe that. I mean, I know that kind of like word that we just completely take for granted is a word that Asimov fabricated out of nothing. Any thoughts about streaming interactive fiction in the future? Obviously not great visually for streaming, but some very interesting stuff out there story and gameplay wise. I agree. I love interactive fiction, and I have fallen out of the interactive fiction scene. I haven't read anything that's come out in the last couple of years. So I would be totally into, at least doing like a trial run thing, experimenting with something, and seeing how it goes. I feel like, some things are going to lend themselves better than other things to this kind of a show. And Hotline Miami has issues, just not even because it's an action game, as much as because it's got this repetitive structure, but also because it's an action game. I mean, I do find myself occasionally like zoning out because I'm paying so much attention to what's going on screen, that I'm not saying anything interesting. Interactive fiction, I wouldn't have that problem, but it potentially has other problems. The fact that it's so not visual is potentially a problem. But I would totally be interested in like trying it out and seeing how it goes. Neuromancer coins cyberspace. I believe that too. Like it's something like that. Robot is a term that Kopik made up based on a Russian term for indentured labor. I think I have heard that before. I think, yeah, I believe that. Okay, any last questions? Otherwise, I'm going to head to bed. This has been a long day of Hotline Miami. Just beating up my brain. Okay, guys. I feel like we never really got to talk about Stanley Parable. I know that there were some questions that I never got to answer about that. I don't know. when I'm going to have time to do that, though, because I'm trying to get through all of these games. I would love to finish Hotline Miami this weekend, but I have work to do tomorrow. I have work to do on Monday. I might have to get started on it tomorrow. So I am going to have to, I think, play it by ear in terms of streaming the rest of this weekend. If I'm lucky, I can stream a little bit on President's Day. Actually, I don't want to promise that because in the evening, obviously, on President's Day is mostly walking. I'll be doing that. But maybe tomorrow I'll be able to find some time. I just have to go out and run errands in the morning and then grade papers. So thank you everybody for sticking around. That was a lot of fun. I love talking about games like this. I love talking about Clockwork Orange and just hanging out and chatting with you guys. So I really appreciate you sticking around the many hours that I spent trying the very beginnings of levels over and over and over again and dying and dying and dying. It's nice to have had some support from people to get through that. I'm going to try my darndest to actually finish Hotline Miami at some point. Keep an eye on my Twitter, and I will let you know next time I'm going to be able to stream. Thanks a lot, guys. Have a great night. Happy Valentine's Day.